Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Good? Everybody good? All right, awesome. Well, there's a lot of faces out there I haven't seen in a long time, and it's not even because of masks, actually. As Jamie said, usually in the first hour, I'm in the youth group, so I don't usually see you all who attend the first service. But it's great to see you all this morning. I hope everybody's doing well. If you're here in person, I'm glad you're here. If you're joining us online, glad you're here with us. So if you've been here the last couple months, you know that we've been going through a series, that series up on the screen, Power of the King of Kings. And we've been going through the book of Mark as we've talked about just like different ways that Jesus has power. And it's been a really cool series of seeing different ways that Jesus has power as revealed through the Gospel of Mark. And so we're going to keep going through that. We're going to keep in that trend. We're going to be continuing through the book of Mark in chapter 5 today. But before we get there, I want to ask you a question. It's kind of a rhetorical question. That's okay. I want to ask you if you've ever felt truly desperate. I'm not asking you to raise hands, but have you ever felt truly desperate? You're out of choices. Maybe you've run out of options. You don't have anything else you can do. You've literally exhausted all the things. You just don't know where to go. And all you can do is just throw your hands up and be like, that's it. I'm out of choices. All I can do is just say, God, please help me. That's all I have. I can't do anything else. I'll give you an example of this, and maybe you can relate, maybe. So I used to be I used to deliver pizzas for Pizza Hut. I don't think that's the part you'll relate to. But I learned Longmont's roads pretty well. I felt pretty good about it, and it got me to the point where I was pretty comfortable driving in Longmont. I knew the roads real well, and I love to listen to music and podcasts and think while I'm driving, and so because I know the roads, I don't have to necessarily think too much about where I'm going, especially if it's places we go to regularly, right? You know what I mean? And what happens is sometimes in the midst of my thoughts or the music or the podcast, I zone out a little bit. Anybody do that? Okay, I'm not alone, okay. And what has happened to me on not one occasion, not just one occasion, at least one occasion, has been I'm zoned out, I'm kind of just thinking or whatever it is, and maybe I'm going a little too fast because I'm not too focused on that, and I drive past a cop. Anybody been there? That is a moment of desperation, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I just drove past, like that. And in that moment, we immediately realize I'm speeding. We know all the things we're doing wrong. We know my hands should be up here, not down here. All the things. And in that moment, we're just like, God, please, blind the officer, right? or change the speed that's on their radar gun. Show something that I'm not doing. Or even just man, I pray that they've been having an amazing day so that they show me grace, right? We do all those things because in that moment, there's nothing else we can do, right? We get so spiritual in those moments because there's nothing else we can do. When we run out of options, I think that's when we get the most spiritual in a sense. And all we can do in that moment is just say, God, please help me, because I already did the thing, and I should be getting in trouble right now, so please have mercy on me. And obviously that's a silly situation, right? But there are other situations in our lives that we feel that way too. I'll give you an example. A couple weeks ago, 2 or 3, I got a message. Actually, my whole family got a message from a friend of ours in Peru. And if you don't know, COVID there is a little bit worse than it is here. They're still having a pretty hard time. And he was sending us a message to let us know that his dad was in the ICU. And he was going into the ICU, he had COVID, and he was going on a ventilator. And he was messaging us saying, hey, please pray for my dad. This is a family we know really well. He's saying, please pray for him. Now, in that moment, what can I do? I wish I could just, snap my fingers and he's better, right? That would be amazing. I wish I could, provide some cool cure for him. That would be awesome. But in that moment when he's asking us to pray, what can I actually do? I can't do anything. All I can do is just throw up my hands and say, God, please intervene. Please meet me in this situation. Please heal him, right? I can't do anything. It's desperation, right? And those of us who've lost loved ones, we know what that's like. It's really hard. So keep that mental picture and feeling of desperation in mind, because that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about today, is we're going to be talking about two people in the book of Mark who experience that kind of desperation. They're at the end of their rope. They're just throwing up their hands. They don't know what to do. They run out of choices. So as we read these stories, it's kind of one story, but it's two people. As we read these stories, I want us to look at this, and that's that genuine faith, it's up there. Genuine faith inspires real action, but doesn't always result in what we expect. All right, so first things first. We're going to be looking at Mark 5:21. We're going to start there. We're just going to read this piece by piece as we go along. It'll be on your screens. That's where I'm going to be reading it from, because my Bible's a different version. We're going to read that right now. And as we see that, we're going to see that genuine faith inspires real action in these next couple stories as we see the characters that we're introducing. So we'll start in Mark 5:21. So it says, "And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, 'My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live.' And he went with him, and a great crowd followed him and thronged about him." So, as we look at the story, we know, based on Jamie's sermon last week, right, Jesus had just, cast the demons out of the man, right, who'd been, this crazy man who'd been, had breaking chains, all sorts of different things. He cast the demons out into the pigs. The pigs ran into the water, drowned. People are like, "Hey, please leave." So Jesus leaves. He goes back across the Sea of Galilee, and that's where we are. And we have a crowd of people gathered around Jesus on the shore, right? And which this shouldn't be a surprise. I think people loved the teachings of Jesus. People loved the miracles that he did. People were excited. And we see this man who's introduced, Jairus, introduced. And it says, he's a synagogue leader, so he's kind of important. And it says that he has a dying daughter. Now, Jesus had done a number of miracles, right? Healings, different things like that in that area. So Jairus was convinced, right? He probably would have heard about what Jesus had done. He would know that Jesus had done amazing things and could do amazing things. And so he just wanted Jesus to come to his house, right? "Hey, come, my daughter's dying." I think another translation is, my daughter is at death's door. I mean, that's pretty desperate, right? Come, lay your hands on her and heal her. And so Jesus agrees, right? He's going to Jairus' house, and the crowd is going with him. And Jairus, it's amazing. Typically when we read about religious leaders in Scripture, right? A lot of times there's this conflict between them and Jesus. They don't typically like Jesus very much. So I think that's really interesting. But as we also think about, Jairus as a synagogue leader, there's a couple interesting things about him that I want to notice. First is that as a synagogue leader, I mean, that's a position that has some reputation, right? You're not, that you got some clout, you've got some sway and some influence. And I think somebody like that would probably have a pretty good medical team, I would imagine, or at least be able to have that kind of care. So this is a guy, right? A synagogue leader, a parent who is going to Jesus because, what else does he have, right? He's just saying, Jesus has done these amazing things. I need Jesus to come meet me in this situation. And I think for those parents out there, I'm not a parent, but some of you who are parents, you know what that's like, right? When your kids are, going through something hard or they're in the midst of a crisis, you want to swoop in and be there for them, right? You want to do what you can to take care of them. And so I think that's what we're seeing here is Jairus is wanting to take care of his daughter and do what he can to provide for her, to take care of her. And so that's why he's with Jesus. And he has this clear, what's really interesting is he has this clear faith. They're like, man, if Jesus can just show up, he's going to fix it. Right? It's really clear. That's what's happening. And I think that's really interesting. That's our first character is Jairus, the synagogue leader, all right? Second character we get introduced here is the woman. The woman. All right, so we're going to read it in Mark 5:25. We're going to pick it up. It says, "And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians. And had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, 'Even if I touch his garments, I will be made well.' And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. It's awesome. So here we have another description, our second character here. We had Jairus. This is our second character. This woman, unnamed. Jairus gets a name, I guess, but this woman doesn't get a name. And let's just talk a little bit about, there's a pretty vivid description, right, of like who she is. So it gives us a lot of details about her life. She'd suffered for a long time, 12 years, right, this flow of blood that just wouldn't stop. She said she'd spent everything on treatment, or at least if it didn't say it right there, I can't remember if it said it right there or it will, but she spent everything she had on treatment, and she's not trying to make a scene, right? She's like, I'm not trying to get in the way. I'm just trying to touch his robes just so that I can be healed. It's just a small thing. And she's unclean. So in that culture, if you got blood on you or you touched something dead, you were unclean. You had to kind of be like out of society for the rest of the day. And what's really hard is imagine being that way for 12 years, having this flow of blood. You're kind of just out of society in a way, or you're unclean for 12 years. That's really hard. So she's desperate, right? She's desperate, but she believed, she'd heard about what Jesus could do, and she believed that touching his robes would heal her. To me, that's pretty crazy. Like, I don't think any of us has ever thought, man, if I can just like touch that person's like hoodie, like then I'll be healed. Like that's not, that's weird, right? Like to me, that's crazy. And it's crazy for the most part because of her circumstances. Here's this woman, which, and that's, in a way that in that culture, that's not a positive thing, right? So she's a woman and she's unclean. And so there's a lot of reasons she should feel out of place where she is and doing what she's doing. And so if we look at both of these characters, Jairus and the woman, they both are in these really hard situations. I would argue that they were desperate. And they're doing the only thing they can do, right? They're just like, Jesus does amazing things. Let's go talk to him. Like, he can fix it. And so I personally think that's crazy faith. And I think that's a faith that really inspired them to actually do something about it, right? For Jairus, he's saying, I'm going to go talk to him, and he's going to come to my house if I can convince him, and then he'll heal my daughter. And the woman is saying, if I can just touch his robe, then I'll be healed. That's amazing action. And so as we think about this idea, I think that desperation, right? This is a desperation. I think that desperation is an opportunity for us. I think it's an opportunity for us to run to God and trust him in the midst of our hardships and what we're struggling with. In the same way that they knew if they could talk to Jesus or touch his robes or whatever, like the solution would be there. I think we can take our desperations and our struggles to Jesus too. But I want to ask you this, because I think sometimes we talk about this stuff and it feels a little abstract. I want to ask you, we're not going to shout out answers, all right? I want you to think about, for you, what in life are you desperate for God's help with? What struggles do you have? Like, what's going on? What in your life is just like, man, it just feels like there's nothing left. I can't do anything else. I'm at the end of my rope. There's nothing left for me. Throwing my hands up. What in life are you desperate for God's help with? So maybe some of us can think about something right now. And I want to follow up with this a little bit of a challenge, and I want to ask you, have you talked to him about it? Because I think a lot of us, our instinct is I don't know why this is, but like when we're frustrated, either I think we do one of two things. We either like really take it to Jesus and we're like, God, please help me, like I need this. Or we do the opposite and we're like, thanks a lot, God, like you're like this hard situation, you must not be here. And we give him the cold shoulder. We tend to do one of those things, and I want to ask, have you talked to him about what you're desperate about? Because I think he wants to hear that. I think he wants us to share that with him and take that to him, because he loves us, and he wants to hear those things from us. It's an opportunity. Our desperation is an opportunity for us to run to God and trust him. So, as we see these two characters, what I'd argue is that genuine faith inspires real actions. In this case, Jairus in a high place, woman in a low place, doesn't matter. It's true for everyone. But the reality in our lives is that it doesn't always result in what we expect, does it? Like, we know that. We know that, like, not everything always works out the way we want it to, but I think that's frustrating. I feel like that's frustrating for us, right? We want things to go the right way. We want to jump through the hoops and do the right things. Like, I prayed and I read my Bible 6 days this week, so therefore I should get what I want, right? But the fact is sometimes the cop does pull us over. And sometimes things just don't go the way we want them to. And so, as we look through the rest of the passage, really, we're going to see that the result that these two people were hoping for is not what they would have expected. All right, so let's start in Mark 5, verse 30. It says, "And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, 'Who touched my garments?' And his disciples said to him, 'You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, "Who touched me?" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing that what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease.'" Just upon reading that, I think one of my favorite things is I read that passage with a little bit of attitude. All right, I like to imagine, but I mean, Jesus stops, right? So first he stops. So Jairus is like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you stopping? Like, we're on our way somewhere." And he asks what I think the disciples are like, "What? This is a dumb question." Like, I mean, they're clearly flustered by this question of like, "Who touched me?" It's like, Jesus, everyone touched you. You're in a crowd. That's how it works. Like, everybody's trying to get to you. And so it's like, of course, like, that's a crazy question. But it's not a crazy question for Jesus. Because clearly it led to something amazing, what he was hoping for. But they're flustered by that. I mean, like I said, he had a crowd around him, so it's like, how could Jesus possibly ask a question like that? But he stops anyway, again, probably to Jairus' chagrin, and the woman comes forward. And I think he really stops, one of the reasons he stops is because he doesn't always do what we expect, right? He breaks our expectations all the time. And so as we look at this woman, I mean, we kind of already talked about her history, but, she feels guilty and ashamed and kind of going a little, wow, this is really, okay. Going a little bit deeper into kind of why. I mean, we already talked, she's a woman, she's unclean, all these different things that would make her kind of like lesser in that culture. And on top of that, I mean, let me ask you something. Basically, in that culture, if somebody who was unclean touched somebody else, well, then that somebody else is unclean too. So then they're out of the society for the rest of the day. Now, if I'm like hanging around somebody awesome like Jesus, and somebody who's unclean touched me and I have to be out of there, I would be upset, all right? I would be angry. And I think, like a good kind of parallel, I imagine, is like, think about COVID, right? We've been in a pandemic for like 2 years. Just coming up on 2 years. You ever got that like text or call or email or telegram or whatever you have, and it's like, hey, you're exposed to COVID, and therefore you have to be quarantined for, what is it, 5? Well, now it's 5, or before it was 10, and then before that it was 14 days. That's a long time. It's not a fun conversation. I draw parallels to that. I mean, like of being like, you're kind of not cast out, because we don't cast people out for that, but it's, you're separated for a while. I mean, she's been doing that for 12 years. That's all really hard. But anyway, so she's around these people, she's touching all sorts of people, and they'd be like, why are you, like, you're making me unclean, if they recognized her and all that stuff. So I would be afraid too, if I was her. I think I would struggle with that. Because, she would never have been allowed in a community space like that in that situation, touching all sorts of people. But the fact is, she knows all those things. She knew she was unclean. She knew she had all these issues. But despite that, she's willing to risk all the social ramifications for what? Just a chance. If I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. It's crazy faith. And it drove her to action. And what I love about Jesus' response is, he says, if we could actually put that verse up there where he talks about where Jesus responds to the woman, but he says that her faith made her well. Now you would think that her faith, when she's off isolated, would be enough to make her well. That's really interesting, right? But somehow she wasn't healed. I mean, she touched his robe. That somehow made the difference. It's weird, right? It reminds me of like James, how like these actions are connected to our faith, right? Our faith and actions are connected some synergistic way that maybe we don't fully understand. And what's interesting about that too is, to me, it's like, I mean, he's treating her with great respect, especially in that circumstance, more than I think people would have expected. He's showing her like that she has dignity and value. And daughter, I mean, this is a really endearing term, like not just like woman, like daughter, It's a kind treatment. And he tells her that her faith made her well. I mean, that's crazy, right? It's not like her godliness, like, oh, man, you just are so amazing that you're going to be made well. And not her good works. It's her faith, her trust in Jesus. It's fascinating. And it's also fascinating that it doesn't say anything about anyone else being healed. It's an argument from silence, I understand that, but I'm just saying, it's interesting that there's a bunch of other people around him probably touching Jesus' robes too, and it doesn't say anything about them being healed. It's interesting. Again, it's not her godliness, not her good works. It's her faith made her well. But within that, I want to ask you this. How often do we associate our blessings in the positive things in our life with what we do, our good works, our godliness? Like I said, if I read my Bible 6 times a day and I do it the whole month, or 6 times a week, and I do it 4 weeks in a row for a whole month, maybe I can redeem it for some Jesus points, right? Like we do that, right? Oh, well, if I do that, then Jesus is definitely going to give me a raise at work. We tend to convince ourselves that that's how it works, but I don't think that's right, because I think we convince ourselves that our own abilities to fix our circumstances and all that stuff, that's somehow like we've earned these blessings or something. But the fact is, it's like, in this situation, it wasn't that she did all the right things, that she jumped through all the hoops. It's that she had faith. And her faith drove her to action. It's amazing. And so all that, the whole time, Jairus is over there waiting, right? Poor guy. Honestly, it's like she's been given special treatment over his daughter. I mean, and she's an unclean woman. He's like a male religious leader. He's more important in that culture. I think he'd be pretty upset. It doesn't say what his attitude was. Maybe they censored it out. I'm not sure. But I would imagine he'd be pretty upset. I would be, right? Because he told me that we were going to go to my house and heal my daughter, and we're stopping for this woman, this unclean woman. My daughter's situation is a little more desperate. Didn't you know that, Jesus? And so it makes me wonder, this is just kind of something I've been processing through, is I would imagine, I think he's been having a lot of jealousy. I would imagine that's a jealous situation to be in. That's the way I see it. And again, it doesn't say that explicitly. I'm imagining a little bit. But I want to ask this anyway, because it brings me to this question, is when have we been jealous of how God was working in the lives of others and seemingly forgetting about us? You ever been there? It's like, God, oh man, God, I'm thankful. I guess I'm thankful that good things are happening for them. But when do I get my turn? I'd like that. I'd like that nice thing. I'd like that blessing or whatever it is. I think we can get jealous of what God is doing and jealous of what God is doing in the lives of others instead of being excited and trusting him. And I don't think that's good. I think we need to learn to be able to trust that he's actually doing things in his time and his way. And on top of all that situation that I'm sure is already hard, it's already hard enough I would imagine. And then on the cherry on top of that, we see in verses 35 and 36, check this out. While he's still speaking, Jesus is still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." Thanks, Jesus, for that platitude. You know what I mean? It feels like a platitude. Oh, don't be afraid, just have faith. I feel like we do that sometimes. Does anybody ever do that to you, or have you ever done that to somebody else where somebody tells you something really hard and you're like, I'll pray for you. And really what you're saying is, I need to get out of here because this is a little too much for me. That's, I think, how we handle it, but I don't think that's what Jesus is saying here. I'm just saying I think it would feel like a platitude. Think about what Jairus is going through, right? He's on top of what he was already feeling. Now he's feeling probably angry. Jesus, why are we taking care of this woman? We were supposed to go. You promised, and now we're here. And my daughter's dead. You missed your opportunity. Or maybe he's disappointed. Well, I'm sure he's disappointed. I'm sure he's sorrowful. Of course, he just lost his daughter. And on top of that, I mean, I'll bet he's pretty jealous. Pretty jealous, like, hey, like, my situation was time sensitive. It doesn't seem like hers was, and so you kind of got it all mixed up. Jesus, like, what are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. And so, again, this brings me to another question, is when do we feel like God isn't there for us? You know, maybe we have those situations right now where we're like, man, I feel like my job is a dead-end job. Or it's like, God, I just lost a loved one. Or, you know, whatever our situation is, it's like we can feel like God just isn't there. Like he's not listening. Like he's distracted by somebody else's problems. Or whatever it is, and he's not thinking about us. We feel this way. And how do we respond? Like, if you think about a time when you were desperate in your life and you felt like God wasn't there for you, how did you respond? You know? And like, what was your attitude? Like, what's our attitude when God doesn't do what we expect him to do or want him to do? I think that's the situation that Jairus is in. Is like, what's he going to do? What's the situation? How's he going to respond? And what we're going to see is that Jesus is doing things in his ways and always does. And we'll see how Jesus is doing things in his ways in a second here. But I want to ask, can we trust that? Can we trust that Jesus is doing things in his way, in his timing? Because if we don't feel that way, like if we don't trust that, I think we can pray and ask God to help us to trust that. Let's pray that, like let's let that be our prayer, that we can actually trust Jesus and give those things to him, because his ways are above our ways. He knows what he's doing. And the last thing I'll say about this situation before we get to the next section of the passage is I want to ask you, first let me say, I think Jesus is pretty cavalier about somebody dying. He's not like, Jairus, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. No, he's just like, hey, don't be afraid, have faith. That feels pretty cavalier to me. And I just think that would be hard. It'd just be a hard situation. And so, again, I want to ask you another question, and that's, are we willing to trust that Jesus knows what he's doing when it doesn't seem like it? And those questions are really closely tied together, right? It's the challenge of, that's really the core of faith, right? Can we trust that God is who he says he is and that he knows what he's doing? So we're going to see that he does know what he's doing in the next passage, all right? So we're going to read, we're going to pick it up, we're going to read the rest of the passage here. So it says, and he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. Yeah, me too. This girl is like dead. She's super dead, right? These people, it's not like they didn't know how to check, take a pulse, right? They knew how to see if somebody was alive or dead, right? And he raises her to life. Think about Jairus. He had to be going through this slew of emotions leading from when he found out that his daughter had died until this point. Everything is going wrong for him. Nothing is going well. And then we see that Jesus shows up and he's like, no big deal. She's not dead. And he raises her back to life. That's amazing. And I think in a situation that's evidence in this story of Jesus knowing exactly what he's doing. When he finds out Jairus' daughter dies, he's not fazed. He's like, no, it's fine. You don't even know what I'm doing because I'm about to take care of it. Trust me. And I think, this is just evidence of that Jesus knows what he's doing and he does things in his own way. And I was thinking about this actually this morning. And you want to know another example of ways that Jesus breaks our expectations? This is pretty amazing. The cross, right? Everybody's like, okay, well, when the Messiah shows up, he's going to like overthrow the government, and he's going to be the ruler, he's going to do all these things. They had all these expectations for what Jesus is going to do and how he's going to do it, all this stuff. And he shows up and dies. Like, that's not how it's supposed to go. Like, what are you doing, Jesus? He flips around, doesn't he? He defeats death and rises again. I mean, he does that for us, for every single one of us. And he takes our sin upon himself. He died so that we could have new life. That's breaking expectations. Jesus has been doing that forever. We just don't always see how it is. Now, in this story that we just read about the woman and about Jairus, it's a pretty happy ending, right? It's a fairy tale ending. Like, everybody gets what they wanted. Awesome. The hard and harsh reality is that we don't always see that happy ending. It's really easy to read a story like this and be like, guys, that means that if you just pray and if you just wait, you're going to get what you want, and you're going to get that raise, and you're going to get that great job, and you're going to get all those things that you want. I would love to be able to say that. And just walk down and be like, yeah, have a great day. That's not how life works. That would be amazing. The fact is, we look at this story and we're like, oh, in that case, in my life, I'll see the happy ending, but we don't necessarily. And that's where the hard part is. So we're called to trust that Jesus knows what he's doing. His ways are above our ways. He knows what he's doing. And the cross was a total break of expectation. But he knew what he was doing. And there were people in the Old Testament who never saw that. They had to trust that Jesus knew what he was doing. And we also get to have hope, right? We know that Jesus is making all things new. And in the meantime, I think what we're called to as followers of Jesus is what Jesus said in verse 36. He said, don't be afraid. Have faith. When we experience those hard things, that desperation, it's an opportunity for us to trust God and trust what he's doing. Because genuine faith, while it inspires real action, it doesn't always result in what we expect, and that's hard. But we can trust him because he's good. One last thing I'll just share with you as a point of praise is at the beginning I shared the story about the cop the idea of a cop pulling me over or not pulling me over. And then I shared with you about my friend and his dad who was in the ICU. I mean, when you're on a ventilator, that's pretty bad news. A couple days ago, I got a message from him, and accompanied with some pictures. Story did end happily for them. He got out of the hospital, and he's home now. After this scare, but what was cool in this whole process is I remember there was a Zoom call at one point with their church, and can you imagine? It was 300 people on this, 300 accounts on the Zoom call. So more than 300 people were there on the Zoom call specifically to pray for him. When was the last time you were on a Zoom call with 300 people? I don't think I've ever been on that. But they had great faith. It's amazing. And I'm so thankful that the way it worked out, he's out of the hospital. It worked out great. And that's one of our times that we can just be thankful. But we know that Jesus is good. We can trust that. He doesn't always do what we expect, but he is good, and he is trustworthy. Let's pray. God, thanks for this day. It's hard sometimes to trust you, God. It's hard to believe that what you're doing is good and that you know what you're doing. And God, it's just hard. I know we're all in the midst of situations that are either desperate or discouraging or seem hopeless or whatever it is. God, you know where each of us is and what each of our circumstances is. God, I pray that you would be with each one of us. God, help us to trust you in the midst of that and to know that you're good and that you're working in ways that we don't understand. God, I pray that you would work through that. God, help us in our unbelief. Help us to trust you in the midst of that. God, I pray that you would help us to take that faith into our week and trust you in those things that we're struggling with. In Jesus' name, amen.